To find my presentation here. It's a real honor to be with you. You know, it's very early in the morning here, but I know that you're in the afternoon of your conference, so in very different modes of thinking. But I wanted to talk about, I'm going to talk about mainly about football, to be honest. But what I wanted to start by saying is that I got into this area really through modeling behavior of animals. And so for many years, I worked on collective behavior of animal species. And these are just some of the examples of the species I worked on. These are ants, fish, human crowds, ant networks again, pigeons, and that was sorry, that was a and human again, human, sheep, prawns, anything that moved or signaled to each other in groups. I worked on trying to understand using mathematical models the behavior of the systems. And one of the primary ways in which we did those types of models was we looked at how individuals interact locally to produce global structures. So you see when you have, for example, frightening of the fish, in this example, you can see each fish is interacting with a few neighbors around it. When you give it the stimulus, that sort of interaction spreads through the entire group. And the way we modeled this then was often using, we call it, we had a little bit different names, but often we talk about self-propelled particle models. And this is an example of one such model. Here, the particles or the fish or the birds are moving in 3 dimensions. And each of them is just following a simple rule where it looks to its local neighbors and follows and moves towards its local neighbors. It also has a blind angle behind it, so it doesn't see the neighbors behind it. But that's the rule that every one of these individuals is following. And through those individual rules, they make very interesting collective behavior, collective patterns. So here they made a mill going round. Now they're making a sort of flock that's moving. And you can see a whole range of different shapes and behaviors which emerges, you can say, out of those interactions. And here is an example. We make a phase diagram to find out. In this case, we found there was like 8 different phases of motion that could be generated for different parameterizations of this model. So you can read a little bit more about that here. And what is fascinating there is that same kind of approach can be applied to anything. And so I wrote a book called Soccermatics. And the idea of this book, first of all, it was an idea of like, how could I talk about some of the mathematical biology work in a way people could relate to? And football was a good way of thinking about that, because if you think about the bird movement, well, football players also have this collective movement. They move around the pitch in an organized type of way, much like a fish school or a bird flock. And what we could do is or what I could do in the book is I showed that many of the mathematical models that we could use to understand birds could also be able to understand football movement. And not only the movement, but also things like game theory, where you want to look at strategy and tactics. Well, you can look at that also applied to animal behavior for survival and so on. So all sorts of different models that we could use in animal behavior could also be used in football. And this took me on quite an adventure in the end, because football coaches seem to agree with this analysis I've had. And so I got to go and watch Messi close up, and I did a documentary about him. I got to go to La Masia, which is the place in Barcelona where they have the training academy for the players. I've visited Ajax. I've worked with the English FA. I've worked with various clubs around the world. And I've met Gary Neville as well, who's a very famous former player and pundit in the UK. And so there was a lot of interest in this type of approach, thinking about how we could use mathematical models to understand football. And I'm going to go right back to one of the first things that I ever thought about with this. And this is a goal from a few years ago now, but it's a goal from the famous Lionel Messi from the earlier stages of his career, 2010, 2011 season. And what I want you to note here, thinking about the collective behavior, is not just him that scores the goal. If you notice, he receives two passes from his teammate. And one of the first ideas I had about how we could think about this mathematically is using what we call a Voronoi diagram. So here is, I'm having some difficulty getting my pointer up. I can see it's there. Wait a minute. Why is it not doing that? Put the pointer up like that. I think that should work. Oh, I don't know why it's not working. Sorry about that. Let's see. No, sorry, 1 second. Oh, I don't want to do all of this. Okay, I'm just going to have to continue without that, I'm afraid. Okay, so if you look in the top left-hand corner, you see the Messi's first pass there, and he passes to Javé, and you can see that they've got open triangulation of passes. But if you look in, and that's what we call the Delaunay triangulation. It's the triangulation to neighbors which they share an edge with. And what do I mean by edge? Well, if you look in the bottom diagram there, you'll see that I've defined zones for every player. So we've got a Javé zone, an Iniesta zone, and a Messi zone. And those are all the points in space that are closest to Messi, all the points in space that are closest to Javé, and so on, are shown in these types of zones. And if you draw lines at right angles to the edges of those zones, you get also that Delaunay triangulation. And what this meant is we could say when looking at Barcelona, when playing tiki-taka, they were, by opening up space, they were also producing passing triangles. And there's lovely mathematical relationship there. If you can optimize, if you can open up as much space as possible, you also open up very clear passing triangles between the players. And so they're utilizing that mathematical relationship between the Voronoi diagram, which describes space usage, and the Delaunay triangulation, which describes the closest connections between individuals. And if you look closely in the bottom diagram, bottom left diagram there, when Messi makes the pass to Javé, you'll see that the opposition defenders are on the edge of the Voronoi diagram. So they're stuck in the middle. And that gives you a very nice principle for how you can play. Keep opening up space and the triangles will come. The diagram on the right, it shows the same thing for Pedro, for a pass to Pedro a few seconds later. The space is much tighter, but the principle is the same. He moves into a space, he opens up for the possibility of a pass, and then he can release Messi with the next pass. And what amazed me when I finally came down to Barcelona and went to La Masia and had that experience of watching Messi up close, but also talking to the coaches and the training staff there, I found that they were using a very simpler model. This is Javé Fernandez, and he was a PhD student there at the time. And he used a model which looked it was a little bit more complicated and a little bit more realistic than the model I'd presented, but the principle is the same. The green areas here are areas where Barcelona control, so they come closest to the ball. Barcelona in the pinkish color. And the yellow areas are areas where the opposition control. And here they're taking into account not just the positioning, but also the velocity of the players when they make that calculation. But they would use this type of technique in order to measure the space available to the players and see how Barcelona were able to control space throughout the match. And this gives a really nice mathematical principle that we can use in all aspects of understanding play. We actually have a series, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other ones, but we have a series of different spatial principles in football. One of them is the one that I've just described. It's called pitch control. It's how much space you control. Another one has various names, but one of the names is pass impact. It's also known as expected threat. That's the one in the middle here. And that tells you the value of a pass. If you pass the ball nearer to the goal, you get more value from it. We can also, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, work out the pass probability. So the probability a pass is going to be successful. That's more based on the physics of the motion of the ball. And so we've built up those types of models to understand the interactions between the players and also the value of what they do in various situations. And we can use those. And I got the opportunity to work very closely with Hammarby Football Club in 2019 here in Sweden. And we could actually look at those principles in practice. So this is an example. I'll show you the footballing example first. Hammarby are the green team, so we're interested in them. They're currently defending. And the ball comes in. You see it's headed away. And this is, well, it's quite a nice attack now. Hammarby are quick into attack. You can see both running forwards on the right, left and the right here. And they managed to get it out to the edge, into the middle, and it's a goal. So it's a lovely example of first good defensive organization, followed by the opportunity to run through the defense and score a goal. Okay, so let's break this down. This is now a exactly this pitch control view that I talked about from Barcelona. And you can see where the players control space throughout the attack. And see, this was the player on the left wing. This is the player on the right wing. They have control in the middle there, opens up this space. Then the ball comes into the middle and he scores the goal. Okay, so this is another representation top down from this. And then let's just look in detail at the defensive situation. So the defensive situation is shown on the left. Notice when player 13 heads away the ball, it's not just that Hammarby have control, the green team, Hammarby have control of the box. They also have control of the area outside the box. So they can receive the, so when the ball, you can think of the ball as sort of going out of the box in a random direction. It's not entirely random, but we don't really completely be able to predict it. But if we cover the whole area with green, we have a lot of control over space. And so the left diagram shows very nicely how we had control over quite a lot of space when the ball came out. Now the right diagram shows the not the opposite, but it's showing how we want to open up dangerous space. So we want to control dangerous space in front of the box. And then in the left example, if you look at player 40 and player 20, they've opened up space in front of them in order to receive a pass. So they've opened up dangerous space. And this leads really to, well, yeah, this is another type of diagram. I talked about pass probability. This is now the pass probability for player 20, when player 20 is the one with the ball there. And when he comes up the field, he has a small probability of making the pass forward to player 16, but he has a good chance of making the pass to player 40 or to player 23. He makes the pass out to the left to player 40. Here we can say it's a 98% chance that we can work out. And then when he comes into the middle, well, now player 22 and player 23 have a probability of getting the ball. In this case, player 23 has a better chance of receiving the pass, but player 22 is obviously in a better scoring position. And so now we say that 65% chance into the middle for the first player, 95% for the next. And you saw, well, in the choice was made, and the player managed to score the goal. So this is a lovely way of breaking down each moment into probability of success. And the way we do that is we build those models which say who's going to come to the ball first in different situations. Another example here is thinking tactically about these types of things. And I said that when we recovered the ball in the first example defensively, we had a lot of control of space outside our box. Now, in these two examples, if you look at the example on the right, what we did is we told the players to defend in a cross-like shape. So in this example, player 23 has the ball in the bottom right-hand corner, and the other players form a cross, which then means that they cover a lot of the pitch. Now, in the example on the left, player 11 is a similar type of example. Player 2 has the ball in this case, but player 11 has got out of position, because if player 11 moved into where player 6 is and player 6 could move to 8, then 8 could move to support player 2. So that's a different type of situation, and or it's a different, they haven't followed the optimal situation. So we could describe to the players this type of organization they should use in order to have the best control over space. We also worked with the women's team. By the way, Japan's women's I work a lot on football analytics, and I can say that the Japanese women's league, I've recently found out, is it's equal best in the world with the English Football League and the US Football League now in terms of quality. We're looking at transfers from different leagues, and I didn't know this. Of course, I know about your amazing Japanese women's football team and your performances in World Cups and so on. But I didn't know also that the league is also on a par with the best leagues in the world. So congratulations on that. And we work with the Hammarby women's football team, and we work on the same types of principles. So in this case, they've got a bit out of position. There's too many players out on the right wing when you want to be covering defensive space in case you lose the ball. Okay, so what I've done there is I've told you a little bit about different ways in which you can use these types of models to understand specific things on the pitch. One of the challenges we have as mathematical modelers is deciding what types of models to use. And recently there's been a lot of interest that you can't have missed in AI and machine learning models. Now, machine learning, of course, is a very powerful tool, but a lot of what I've shown you up to now are mechanistic models, right? They don't describe, we don't try and fit them based on some sort of minimization principle that you use in machine learning. We're not trying to learn some sort of target function. What we do is we try to build up a mechanistic understanding of how football works rather than actually machine learn a model. And so one big challenges or the discussions in applied mathematics just now is like, when should you go for this type of approach of a mechanism, and when should you go more for a machine learning type of approach? And this arises not just in the work I do on football, but also on the work I do in animal behavior. And when there's a lot of discussion about this. So if we're thinking about collective behavior in general from individual interactions, whether it be birds and fish or football players and human beings, the two different approaches can be summarized as follows. One is the machine learning approach, and it concentrates on data. It says, what data have we got and what can we learn from that data? And the learning mechanism is minimizing error in predicting the future. You try to predict the future and you minimize the error in those predictions. And then there's an argument also that humans, they sort of introduce a bias, while a model is some kind of objective reality. You even talk about an objective function in this case. And this differs from the mechanistic modeling approach, which I've talked about. Basically, there I've just had like ideas about how football works. I've come up with this pitch control idea, or the Barcelona guys have come up with this pitch control idea, and we've used it to find parsimonious explanations of how football works. And in that, as I said, like human discourse, talking to the coaches, working together with them, that is what is central to the activity. It's not minimizing some function. It's actually that talking and that discussion around ideas, which is really, really central. So those are the two differences between the machine learning and the mechanistic modeling approaches. To make this even more complicated, to make it even more concrete, what I'll do is I'll take an example, a very important example in football, and that's one of expected goals. Now, you're on Zoom, so it's a bit difficult for me to do this, but normally I ask people to say which of these is the best goal. And the reason I do this exercise is I want to make you think about like what's the important characteristics of a goal. So in one sense, the Gareth Bale shot, the one on the left, is a good goal because he manages to score from distance. It's obviously a bit of a mistake by the goalkeeper in this case. And Sadio Mane on the right he manages to score from a very, very near the goal where he shouldn't miss. But what we often talk about in football is that the one nearest the goal had the highest expected goals. And what we find is that it's very difficult for strikers, or the repeatable skill in a striker is getting into those high expected goal situations time after time after time. And managing to score from distance is very rare to manage to do that, and it's very hard to repeat that in a future match. So we sort of think of the right goal as being a better goal because it has a higher expected goals. And how do we come to this? Well, one way of doing it, of course, is to fit the statistical model and so on. And we are going to fit a statistical model here. But what I want to do is I want to formulate that model based on principles to start with. And so if I think about Bale's shot, I think about it as being very far distance. And if I draw lines to the goalpost, like I'm looking at the screen just now and drawing two lines to the screen, I can look at the angle between those two lines, and that's what's shown there, and that's got theta. So Bale's shot has a very small angle. Mané's shot, the second one on the right, it has a very large angle. Now, two shots from different places on the pitch can have, in fact, there's a circle round of infinite different shots which have the same angle, but two shots can have the same angle from different places on the pitch. And so this angle, and also you can think of like a long distance shot is very difficult to score, but if you're out at the edges and trying to score, it's also pretty difficult to do that. So this kind of reflects a reality. How much of the goal can you see? That's the key idea there with a mechanistic model, is you take something which is a reality and you build your model around that. You take something which is common sense and try and build your model around that. There's a bit of mathematics to do. Do a bit of algebra. You can work out from an XY coordinate of the shot, what is the angle, and you come up with the following equation for the angle theta. Then you can fit your model. In this case, you do it with logistic regression by maximizing the likelihood of this particular function. And you find the nice result you have. I mentioned those rings. The nice result you have is you can define different rings which have different percentage of scoring based on the data. So you can have a 30% ring, a 15% ring, 7% ring. It then carries out to a 3%, or 1%, and so on. In fact, it's a little bit more complicated than that. You should also take into account the distance and the angle so that it becomes like a squashed circle when you do the fitting. But what we do is we still use parameters that we can interpret and understand. Now, I want to contrast this with a machine learning approach. This is a paper on the left where they still used lots of features, but they fitted an XGBoost model and they fitted neural networks and so on to expected goals models. And they're sort of sacrificing something to do with the explainability in order to still have in order to get a better model fit. So they're doing a machine learning approach, as I said, in the sense that they're trying to find out, well, what's the best model fit? Then they do something to try and find, they use these SHAP values to find out the explainability afterwards. But my point is that you can do this from the start. You can find out what the important variables are by thinking about the mechanisms involved instead of doing it post hoc after you've fitted your machine learning model. This can be done with even more complicated things, and we've already looked at a few of these, but we were able to build models which both looked at the value and the probability of success of an action. So if you take this pass, for example, those of you who are keen football fans, or you might have a look at the player who's running on the right there, who now looks very disappointed. You can look at him again. So furthest out to the right wing, there's a player running down here. And then afterwards, he looks a bit annoyed. And the reason he's annoyed is that he thinks that he should have been passed the ball instead of the pass that was actually made into the middle, which wasn't particularly dangerous. And we can calculate those types of things. So I mentioned this before. We build a model to look at the ball dynamics what's a possible pass and what's not a possible pass. And we found that the pass to 17 was an open possible pass, while the pass that was actually made to 22 was much less likely to happen. Now, I mentioned one example before where the receiving, okay, it was if we think about the other goal I showed you, the actual goal I showed you, there the pass into the middle was more difficult, but it was a better chance of being a goal. And you can think about here that the pass to 22 might be more difficult, but there's a better chance of a goal. And we can work out that too. And here we do use a machine learning approach. We look at all of the passes that have ever been made, and we try to set a value on the basis of those passes. And then we can think a little bit about it in this way, that like, why make the pass? Well, that's the probability you'll score a goal after you've got the pass. That's on the left. And on the right is, well, what's the probability of the pass being successful? And you can multiply, pointwise multiply those two, and you end up with a diagram that looks like this, that the best pass decision in this case was actually the 12% pass and not the 6% pass that was actually, which was actually taken. And what we've been doing is we've been building up mechanistic models of different layers of football. And this is work I've been doing with Miriam Brunsma at Ajax and Alexander Andrzejewski, who's now moved on to work for a football analytics company. What we've been doing is we've been building up, I've already mentioned the pitch control model. They built what we call a nearest defender model, which tries to say what's the best positioning of the nearest defender in order to avoid, well, for the nearest defender is to get the ball back, but how should you as an attacker move to stop the nearest defender being in the best position? We also have something we call the edges of the pitch model, which tells you, well, it's just difficult to make very long passes near to the edge of the pitch. So we build up those kind of layers of understanding. And when we can put them all together, we can find out, well, what's the probability of a pass being successful? And this allows us then to build what we call a potential passing network, which under a match says who was available for various passing situations. I'm not going to go into the details here. You'll notice I haven't really gone deep into any of the details of how we do this thing. But what I want you to get across here is this layers of football approach idea, that what we're trying to do is build up the mechanisms that really make up football. And from that, we can get the passing network. And that can be contrast then with what the machine learning approach is. And so we took the state-of-the-art work in machine learning approach. This was done by Javier Fernandez, who I mentioned earlier at Barcelona. And what he did is he built a neural network which tried to predict whether there would be a goal or not based on the positioning of the players. And he did the same thing, looking at what would be the best pass. Sorry, this picture is a bit pixelated. I don't know what happened to it. But the picture on the left and the picture on the left is the machine learning model, and the picture on the right is the mechanistic model. The pass, sorry, you can't see this clearly, and my pointer doesn't work. I want to point at the screen here, but the ball is on the right-hand side of the pitch with player 18. And you can see these two models are making very different predictions about what the best pass is. And in particular, what's sort of unrealistic about this model on the left, the machine learning model, is it always suggests like passing up to the top right-hand corner. That's where the red area is. If you look at the left plot, the top right-hand wing of the pitch or the bottom left-hand wing of the pitch is always suggesting a very long pass there, which is unrealistic. And so by building up on the mechanisms, we can capture a more realistic picture of football. And we also see this in the potential pass network, which tends to be quite unrealistic for the machine learning model, but very realistic for the mechanistic model. So what I've gone through there with football is something which I think is a more important, more general point. And you can read about this in a paper I wrote with Lene Yellenberry and Abebe Bariane. And we often think about how machine learning is replacing some of the art of mathematical modeling. If we go back to the fish examples, there's so many different ways of modeling fish And it's the same. There's so many different ways of modeling football. We have lots of different ideas of approaching football and deciding on the models we want to use in football. And those different approaches, whether we're looking at neurobiology or the movement or the turbulence, each of them requires its own model. We can't just throw everything into a machine learning model and learn that way. We really need to have this art of mathematical modeling. And I think I'll just go back. Yeah, I'll just go back and recap this. Machine learning model puts the primacy on data, minimizing future predictions. Mechanistic model puts a primacy on understanding and finding parsimonious explanations. It's important to note that the one on the right, the mechanistic modeling approach, is subjective, and we took input from coaches and all sorts of people inside football. And it's not that when we take opinions into that type of models. And in my opinion, this type of subjective modeling is more important and useful than what might be called objective, because you're just looking at the data, which machine learning always emphasizes. And that is what I had to say. So thank you very much for listening. And I think we've got some bit of time for questions. I know we started a bit late.